Hello, I'm Joanna Green, and on this edition of MTA's Commuter Connections, we'll take you to the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland's African American History and Culture for a look at a new and exciting exhibit. There's a little something new at MTA's Mobility, and we'll answer your customer questions and concerns in our Ask the MTA segment next on MTA's Commuter Connections. Welcome to MTA's Commuter Connections. For this edition of the program, we're at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture in Baltimore, where Maryland and America's history comes to life each day in a number of exciting and captivating exhibits, including the museum's newest, Growing Up Afro, snapshots of Black childhood from the Afro-American newspapers. Now, joining me to talk about this exhibit and what you'll find in this museum is Executive Director Dr. Skip Sanders. Hi, Dr. Sanders, how are you?
Good morning, welcome.
Welcome to this wonderful place. This is great. Thank you so much for having us today.
Well, believe me, it's our pleasure. We're so glad to be here with you.
Well, you know, the biggest thing that people need to know before we even get started about the exhibit is, who was Reginald F. Lewis and his significance to Baltimore? Actually,
he should be so much better known than he is. He was a wonderful entrepreneur and philanthropist, really. He was born in 1942 here in Baltimore, right, and lived right on Dallas Street, right over here in East Baltimore.
Wonderful.
Attended Dunbar, was a great scholar and athlete at the same time. Actually was captain of the basketball team, the football team, baseball team, while he was student vice president.
Oh, so he did a lot.
What a role model for youth from that particular angle. Went to Virginia State, and in his senior year, Harvard sent some people down, which gave him the opportunity to participate in a summer program at Harvard. By the end of that summer program, he was offered the opportunity to come to Harvard. So he was accepted before he filed papers in that sense.
That's amazing, yes.
Always demonstrated his motto of keep going no matter what, because things didn't always come easily for him. He, at one time, because of an injury, he had lost his scholarship at Virginia State.
Wow.
But he went to work, you know, did all kinds of other chores and jobs to make sure he would finish. Same thing with Harvard. When he first went there, he found that there were some things he needed to catch up on.
And we're not talking about Harvard now, we're talking about Harvard in the 50s.
Harvard in the 50s,
yeah,
a whole different kind of climate.
Yeah.
And I actually excelled there. So when he graduated and then went to New York to work, he eventually started his own law firm after he worked for, I think it was Paul Weiss.
Wow, so he went on to become a lawyer and
after graduating from Harvard, and did an awful lot for minority businesses there, you know, getting them into the minority business grants that come on. Then finally decided he wanted to do some of the work himself. He thought that that was fun in a sense. So he went on and started to do that and bought the McCall Pattern Company, bought it for $22.5 million, and then wound up selling it while it was having the greatest profits it had ever known in its 113-year history.
And he made a profit, of course.
He made a profit of $50 million. He sold it for $90 million. So
unbelievable.
That was just a precursor to the big deal, which was a leveraged buyout of Beatrice, a largely European-based company with holdings in 31 countries. Bought that at $985 million, and then again rode that to a level of you know, previously unknown success. He was 50 years old when he died, having accomplished all of this.
That's amazing.
1993.
Well, they say, you know, those rocket flames, they burn out quickly, but while they're here, wow, what a glorious ride.
His friend, former Mayor David Dinkins, said he did more in 50 years than most of us do in a whole lifetime.
And so who came up with the idea, I guess I should say, of having a museum dedicated in his memory?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. It's almost like a confluence of several really important people all at one time. The idea seems to have germinated with people like George Russell, former Delegate Peter Rawlings, father of our current mayor. And then people just came on board with it. I remember Louis Grasmick joined George. We had then Governor Schaefer, who formed a study commission, but every governor from him, going through Governor Glendenning, Governor Ehrlich, and certainly our current Governor O'Malley, supporting. The city gave the land on which it's built. The state certainly contributed through Governor Glendenning initially the money to actually start construction, but you also had people like Peter Angelos through his foundation.
So this is a confluence of not only state funding, but private sector folks who came together.
Yes, and certainly the
this.
Reginald F. Lewis Foundation, which was instrumental in getting all of that started, and Eddie and Sylvia Brown's foundation. So you had that confluence of all those supportive people. And I guess in a sense, we may be unique because we're both a public and a private institution because of how all of that got started.
Now, I guess I should say, when did this museum actually open?
We opened on June 25th, 2005. So we were
still babies.
We were 7 years old 2 days ago. Yes, we're still babies.
Well, you know, you look at this museum. It's modern. It's breathtaking. It's colorful. It's vibrant. And you have to ask yourself, you know, how did you all choose a site like this in the heart of Baltimore City? You sit at the mouth or the gateway of 83. You're right on President Street. How was this particular location selected?
Again, I think that was really the deliberate decision making of some of those early people who got started. I remember hearing George Russell say more than once that the questions they were asked and the answers they gave really came out to be, no, we don't want to be an old building remodeled. We want something new, something that speaks to the community.
And I guess they wanted it in the heart of the city and make it accessible.
We want it where we know the city's action is going to be. Because I've often heard people kind of criticize that, but I think it really was the right decision because it is where Baltimore is most alive. It is the future, not just the past.
Now tell us a little bit about this museum. We're of course talking about the Afro exhibit that's on display, but how many exhibits in general are on display here at the museum?
Well, we've got really 13,000 square feet of exhibit space in this 82,000 square foot building. And it's divided into two large areas, the one where you and I are now, which is for our temporary exhibitions like this wonderful one. But just above us, the entire floor, the third floor, is the permanent exhibition, and it's divided into 3 galleries. So those galleries contain in themselves themed stories. One is called Lines Hold, Things Connect, and it shows how the community formed itself and helped sustain itself against the negative forces that were weighing against us during slavery. The other thing deals with the strength of the mind, the artistic and the academic inventiveness and creativeness of this people in this community. The other one is Building Maryland, Building America. It talks about the kinds of work we did, steel, shipbuilding,
so
all
it's
of
an
that.
homage to some degree about all the wonderful accomplishments of the African American society and culture here in Maryland and across the country.
Yes, and I think it's also a sermon to the present that if these things could be done under the odds that people were facing, what can't be done today by us.
Well, let's tell folks some important information about this museum. What are the hours of operation?
We're open usually from Wednesday through Sundays, and the hours are 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Although during the summer we're going to have some extended hours on what we call the third Thursdays because of a special program. Sundays we're open from noon until 5. Now,
is there a website where folks can get information and also book group visits to the museum?
www.africanamericanculture.org, and we certainly want them to visit that and come visit this museum.
Now tell me, is there a cost associated with this museum?
Yes. Adult admissions is $8. If you are a student with an ID or senior citizen, that's $6. Children under a certain age are free. I think it's $6. So it's pretty minimal cost for everything that's going to be here.
Tell us a little bit about memberships, because I know there are opportunities for folks to become patrons and members of the museum, and what would that take?
And we welcome that. Members, of course, would get in free. A membership is $35 for an individual for a year.
Wow.
$55 for a family for a whole year.
That's very reasonable.
And actually, Joanna, it's much more than even these wonderful exhibits, because we're talking about movies, lectures, activities for children on certain Saturdays of the year, all kinds of special programming. So when you come, the whole panoply of this wonderful building is really at your disposal.
Now, how many people would you say annually visit the museum?
If you average it out, it's about 40,000. We found
great.
that it kind of goes up and
Peaks
down
during
depending
certain
on
times of
seasonal
years.
things. Certainly Black History Month is a big month. I'd like to see it be high all year long.
Oh, we'll certainly do our part to get the
Thank
word
you.
out. Now, before we leave, now, how did this particular exhibit come to be, Growing Up Afro? Whose idea was it?
This was the wonderful idea of a young man at the Afro newspaper named John Gartrell. And he worked in conjunction with our extremely talented curator and director of exhibitions, Dr. Michelle Wilkinson. John really went through all the photographs in the Afro's archives and selected these to show what it was like to grow up Afro with the Afro newspaper.
That's amazing.
From the years 1920 through the 70s, really, and it's a magnificent exhibit.
Well, we certainly, I hope that folks come out and take a look at this. As you know, you and I were having a conversation about how you look at some of these pictures and you recognize some of these folks in these pictures. You even recognize yourself, even if you're not physically in the picture.
Yes.
You can recognize experiences from your own childhood and looking at some of these images.
And the memories, I think, will come flooding back. Remember the Clean Block campaign?
Yes, cleaning your steps. We
You'll
were all
see
out there
that.
with our marble, with our brushes, cleaning that
Yes.
marble.
And the amazing thing is how responsible children were. You'll see
Yeah.
that throughout this exhibit,
It
even
certainly is.
during the Civil Rights Movement, where they're carrying signs about, I can't vote, what's your excuse?
Yeah.
You know, to others.
So those are important milestones. Well, thank you so much for hosting us. We really appreciated being here today.
Well, thank you for being here, and we hope everyone comes down. We're right on a circulator stop.
As well as the MTA Shot Tower Marketplace Metro stop.
That's right.
So it's easy access. Coming up next, there are a few new things at MTA Mobility. We'll show you next.